Good morning. So I wanted to discuss a case with you, a really, really famous case that I've been putting it together to present to my students, but we're all so busy with our jobs at the moment, we haven't really had time to come together and sit and have these tutorials like we usually do, because with the new year starting and our new schedules and things like that, we're kind of like ships in the night at the moment, but this is a case that I've been looking at since I was a little girl because it is as famous as the Ripper murders. If you know anything about your unsolved murders and your paranormal cases. And in preparing the class and waiting to present it, I kind of couldn't wait anymore because I'm too excited. So I don't speak up until I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about, until I'm happy and certain with the facts of the case. And this is a case that is a really odd one, because if you look at a lot of the websites and YouTube videos about this case, um, there's so much that people are leaving out of this that when you look at the full story, I think it's pretty obvious who the killer was. So this is what I want to discuss. And so today in my historical grief investigations, I want to discuss the Hinterkaifeck murders and what I think happened. So we've got the dad, Andreas, the mother, Cazila, the daughter, Viktoria, the granddaughter, Cazila, the grandson, Josef, and the maid, Maria, were all killed at the Hinterkaifeck farm in then Germany, now Bavaria, 1922. The original maid up and quit her job because she, for 6 months prior to her leaving, had been reporting to her boss, hearing tappings on the walls, voices coming from behind the walls, footsteps in the attic, um, rappings, that sort of thing, just strange noises. And after a few months of every night hearing the same thing and it spooking her out, she quit her job and left the farm without help, and they all had to take on the task of doing the extra chores and stuff, and until they got a replacement, which actually took quite a while. They lived in a really, really remote farm. The nearest village was a horse ride away, a horse and cart buggy ride away. The nearest neighbours were a bit of a walk to get to. They didn't have a phone. You couldn't just ring the police and say there's someone walking around my attic. And so after the maid left and they all, kind of had to pick up the slack, eventually the father, Andreas, also started reported hearing the same things. Um, the the knocking, the tapping on the walls, the footsteps in the attic, because every time they checked there'd be no one there, and it just didn't make any sense. And then one morning, Andreas got up to go to the back door, and he found a set of footprints leading from the forest to the house, but there were no footprints going back. One night, the granddaughter Cazila went missing, and they found her wandering, dazed and confused, alone in the woods. And she had no recollection of how she got there. She couldn't explain what had happened or anything like that. And then a set of house keys went missing, and they found a newspaper that they didn't subscribe to on the table. Food was going missing, and obviously, the footsteps in the attic, the rappings on the wall, the tapping, the knocking, the voices, the whispers, that sort of thing all continued. And it was starting to freak Andreas out. And he went to his neighbour Lorenz and he said, "Look, there's this stuff going on, I don't know what to do." And Lorenz said to him, "Look, I've got a gun, like I've got an extra gun you can take." And Lorenz offered this gun to Andreas, and Andreas said, "No, it's okay, it's fine, we'll deal with it, we'll figure it out." And then, of course, they got the replacement maid, and then within 24 hours they were all dead. The logic to this case is pretty obvious. If you look at the full story, if you instead of just going to one website and one YouTube channel, if you do the investigating like I did, even a lot of the books that I read about the case when I was a kid didn't tell the full story, and it's only been over the last sort of 4 or 5 years that more and more has started coming out about it as more and more people started investigating it, but still very few websites and YouTube channels tell the full story. So I'm going to present the facts to you now, and like I said, I think it's going to be pretty obvious who the killer was. So what people don't know about this case is that Victoria claims to have been a widow, her husband killed in war. But when Victoria married her husband and announced she was pregnant, the husband was suspicious because the dates didn't match up. And he mysteriously left to go back home to his family before he went off to war, where he was reportedly killed. So she was telling people her husband was the father of her daughter and that she was now a widow. She told everybody she was a widow, and it's widely reported she was a widow. However, there is no actual documented proof that her husband was killed. Some soldiers that he was in war with said they saw his body. They never said they saw him get killed. And many more people than who witnessed his supposed body had said that later on they had seen him dressed in a Russian uniform. Now, I actually don't believe that the husband had anything to do with the murders, but this is something that people don't look at. It's something that people don't discuss because not the full story is told about this case, and I think that you need to look at it objectively in order to understand just how messed up this family actually were. Because the other thing that people don't realise is that the reason why her husband left her is because he found out that she was having an incestuous relationship with her father, and that he believed that their unborn child was actually her father's child, to the point where the father Andreas and the daughter Victoria were found guilty, sentenced and found guilty of having an incestuous relationship. The father served a year in prison and Victoria served about a month. So it is not even speculative to suggest that Cazila, the granddaughter, is the product of an incestuous relationship between Victoria and her father, and this is why Victoria's husband left her, because he wanted no part of, these were religious people that would have been, that's a mortal sin. An incestuous relationship is a mortal sin, with Cazila, the granddaughter, being the end result. So the father and the daughter actually served time in prison for having a sexual relationship, which resulted in the birth of Cazila and more than likely Joseph. Now, the other thing is that the neighbour Lorenz was having an affair with Victoria. They were having an intimate relationship, and when she got pregnant with Joseph, she had many arguments with Lorenz to convince him that he was the father of Joseph, but he did not believe that he was the father of Joseph, and he had also said that Joseph was a product of a relationship between Victoria and her father Andreas. And that he had called off the relationship, and she was distressed about it because they were planning on getting married and he did want to marry her until she got pregnant with Joseph. And then she had convinced him to stay with her to the point where he eventually agreed and started referring to Joseph as his boy. even though he kind of had felt that Joseph was Andreas' son and not his. But he loved Viktoria, apparently. Now, the other thing is that he reported seeing, reported seeing footprints in the snow leading up to the house from the forest, and when he followed it, he lost the footprints in the forest. But the other thing that isn't widely reported is that it was actually 2 sets of footprints leading up to the house, and that the daughter, Cazila, had gone to school the day before the murders, the day before they were all murdered, and told a school friend that her mum was outside arguing with someone the night before the murders. The school friend had reported to the police that the child had mentioned in passing, "Oh, my mum was outside last night fighting with someone, she was really upset." And then 24 hours later they were all dead. And not a lot of people know that as well, because everybody just keeps saying some spooky things were happening in the house. The people ended up dead. They didn't know who killed them. It must have been ghosts. It must have been entities. It must have been, spooky la rubbish. And it's not. It's perfectly logical if you look at it. If you look at all the findings. So basically what we're looking at is the daughter, Cazila, went missing. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know how she got outside. All the incidences were only ever reported at night. Like, they only ever heard stuff at night. Things only happened at night. And this is really important to understand, because when the police went to question Lorenz, his family said, because, the bodies had been left for 4 days before they were found, and yet people were saying, the chimney was going, the dog was being fed, the animals were being fed, and the dog hadn't reacted to any intruders. The dog wasn't acting weird. When stuff was going on, the dog wasn't reacting to a stranger, and because they lived in a remote farm, a farm dog is going to react when it sees strangers on the property. But this is what people aren't taking into account, is the fact that the dog wasn't reacting either. So the dog had to have known who the perpetrator was. And I truly, truly believe it was Lorenz. I really, truly believe it was Lorenz, because the thing is, his family said there's no way he could have run 2 farms, because he was running his farm during the day, and it's a lot of hard work running a farm. But the thing is, the activity was only happening at night, when he would have had plenty of time to wait for his family to be asleep, because you've got to remember, it was hard slog in those days, and people were having to get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, which is when the little girl was found missing. She was found in the early, she went missing in the early hours, and found sort of in the very early morning, which I believe he carried her out of the property. I believe this was his first attempt to maybe start trying to kill the family by luring them away from the house at night. And I believe that Cazila, the one that he knew was his lover's father's daughter, I believe that her going missing was his first attempt to lure them away from the house, to kill them in the forest. But something happened, maybe when they sent out the search party to go and find her in the early hours, and they found her, he got spooked, or had second thoughts or whatever. But she was confused. She didn't know how she got out of the house into the forest, and I believe it's because he carried her in her sleep. And the tappings on the wall was him coming up to the house at night to alert Viktoria that he was at the property, and the whispers and the voices were them in the attic or outside of the house, engaging in their discussions and their little, dalliances and that sort of thing, and this is what people were hearing because nothing was ever reported during the day, and that I truly believe that what he was doing was he was purposefully doing things to spook the family, to give the impression that somebody was living in the walls or living in the house without them knowing, but in actual fact she was letting him into the house, and he ended up taking the keys so that he could get into the house to start luring um, the bodies or luring the people out of the house while they were sleeping. And that when things didn't go according to plan the first time with Cazila, he had to change his tactics. So then he started acting out the paranormal activity, because it was getting to the point where Andreas was becoming very hypervigilant, and every time he heard a sound he would jump up and go running outside to see what it was. And I think what he did was that he hid in the shed and he made a noise, knowing that Andreas was going to come out, because he'd made certain that he'd made enough noise by that point to start spooking the family into becoming hypervigilant and paranoid. And then he lured the father into the shed by making a sound. The door was open, so I believed he opened the door to get the father's attention. When he went out, he killed him with that pickaxe thing, and then the noise of that, he slowly led them all out. And because the maid Maria and the little boy Joseph were still asleep, because they lived at the furthest end as well, so they wouldn't have had the noise, because you're up early in the morning with your farm, and being hypervigilant and seeing that activity. They all start coming out one after the other to see what's going on, and he's killing them. The internet keeps trying to make out like they were under some form of hypnosis and that, but these people were half asleep. They were waking up to start their day, and then already being paranoid and anxious and hypervigilant. All he had to do was set off a trigger with a sound in the garage, and of course they were going to go out there to see what was going on. And then of course when Andreas doesn't come back to the house, the mum goes out or the daughter goes out, and then he just picks them off one by one, because as they're getting up to start their day and they're realizing that one of them isn't coming back to the house, and then eventually the little girl realizes that they've all gone out to the garage and not come back, and she wants to have her breakfast and stuff. She goes out as well because she's got to go to school, and it's a hike to school. And he just picks them all off one by one, and then goes into the house where the maid and the baby are sleeping, and he kills them there. And then lived in the house for 4 days at night while his farmstead was sleeping, and the bodies were then piled up in the garage. And then of course when he knew that the man was coming, the farmhand guy was coming to fix the feeder, he just went about his day normally at his own property, and made sure that the farmhand knew, that the helper knew that the bodies were in the shed, because when he knocked on the door and no one answered and he walked around, he just started doing his job. And then he could hear the dog barking and the fire was going, and he saw food on the table when he looked through the window, and it was like, again, early hours, and then when he went about his work to fix the feeder, the dog had been found outside. Someone had let the dog out. Someone had been feeding the cattle. And I believe that when he turned up to do his job, Lorenz was in the property and realised that this man was going to find the bodies. And so he kind of thought, okay, the jig is up. I need to get back to my property and this needs to be over. And so he let the dog out to let the man know that, he needed to find these bodies, and snuck back to his property. And then, of course, the bodies were found, and the man ran straight to Lorenz, who then went with his party over to the house, and that's when the police were alerted, and I believe the 2 sets of footprints leading up to the property were his and Victoria's. The other thing that people don't realise is that Andreas apparently was a very despised man, that nobody liked him. Nobody liked him because he was a horrible man. Everybody knew about his relationship with his daughter, and that Cazila was more than likely probably his as well as Joseph's, but because Lorenz claimed Joseph as his own, you know, they didn't think too much about Joseph as well. But apparently the argument, I believe, that Victoria had the night before is that either she was telling him she was pregnant and he wasn't sure who the baby was because there was speculation she was pregnant, even though there's no proof there. She had apparently told a couple of people she thought she was pregnant, and so Lorenz was questioning who the father was, or Lorenz had decided to go back on his promise of marriage to Victoria, and that's what the argument was, because she was distressed. The daughter Cazila had said the night before the murder she was outside arguing with someone and she was visibly distressed. She was upset. And then the next day the murders happened. So she may have threatened Lorenz or something like that. That's just speculation, obviously, but something happened between Victoria and Lorenz, and he decided that the only way that he could get out of this situation was to kill them all. And because I think deep down he was, like everybody else in the town, like disgusted at the fact that she was having a relationship with her father while having a relationship with him, because she was having a relationship with her father while she was having a relationship with her husband as well. And that's why the husband left. And there are no reports that the husband died in war. People say they saw a body, but he's not on any records as having been killed in action, and he was seen months later after he was supposedly have been killed in war, dressed in a Russian uniform. And so, yeah, so long story short, the neighbour was having an affair with Victoria, and was tired of being caught up in this incestuous relationship that she was having with the father, because, reputations are everything. The village was starting to talk, everybody was starting to have an opinion, and it was becoming an embarrassment. And I think that even if his family didn't think that he killed them, they would have still said he didn't, because of the fact that Andreas was not a liked man. Nobody liked him. He was quite despised. And I think that he was conducting his business at night when everyone was asleep, because, working on a farm, it's exhausting work. You don't sleep lightly, and you're up early, early to bed, early to rise. That came from the farm life. You're up early, you're up at the crack of dawn, um, and then you're asleep, like you have your dinner, and then you're asleep at like 6, 7 at night, because it's hard, laborious work, especially back then when they didn't have the kind of machines and technology that they do now to take care of the farms. And so I truly, truly believe that it was the neighbour Lorenz who killed that family in order to protect his reputation, because he was a respected person, and he was the first one that the police looked at. He was the nearest neighbour. It was snowing, and his property was on the other side of that forest. And so that is my conclusion to the Hinterkaifeck murders. And yeah, I couldn't contain it anymore. I've been going over it and over and over in my head the last couple of days as I was getting ready to present it to my students, and I couldn't contain myself anymore, because we haven't had a chance yet to sit and do the tutorials in class. So I just wanted to share that, and I'll put some links in the description box below so you can have a squiz at what I'm talking about. I would love to go to the property with my girls to Bavaria and do a cleansing on that property. to, relieve the burdens of everything that grandmother absorbed, especially with, so many innocent people being involved in that. But yeah, there was a lot more to that case than people are saying, because they all want to just make out like it's a paranormal thing when it had nothing to do with the paranormal, and everything to do with the fact that a man murdered an entire family in order to save his reputation and relieve himself of the burden of being involved in quite a scandalous, morally sinful relationship, because people were now starting to talk too much and it was becoming a hindrance for him, and that the voices in that they could hear um, when they were in bed at night were him and Viktoria, having their meetings, and the tappings was him knocking on the side of the house or the walls or the doors to let her know that he was there. And the keys going missing was that so that he could start luring the family out of the house, and have access to the house after they were dead. Um, but the first attempt with the daughter got botched, and so he had to regroup and re-strategize, which is eventually what he did. So yeah, so food for thought. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll speak to you later. Love you. Mwah.